Hello, everyone. My name is Padmini Nidumolu, and I'm the co-founder of Lean and Agile, an organization that is launched for women and truly by women. And this organization is the platform which is a common denominator for women across the world in Lean and Agile spaces, so we can converge to a common space to learn from each other, to offer to each other, and seek from each other in a psychologically safe space. As a part of this organization, we launched an initiative called LIA100, interviewing 100 women across the world in Agile and bringing their journeys, their stories, their challenges to you all with the hope, with an intention that their journeys and how they survived, how they thrived can be an inspiration to at least one of you out there. So, with that, we have on our show today Brandi Olson. Hey, Brandi, thank you so much for joining us
Hello.
today.
Yes.
Brandi, I'll say a few words about you and then, we can dive right into the conversation.
Great.
Brandi believes, first of all, that you shouldn't have to choose between doing good, important work, and your own humanity. And I absolutely loved it when I heard this statement. It's just so heartwarming, and none of us should be choosing, among any of these three. Brandi works at the intersection between learning, organizational agility, and human-centered design. She has over 15 years of experience consulting with leaders across diverse sectors who share a commitment to people, learning fast, and doing good. Brandy knows that the best way to solve big problems is through happy, high performing teams. So that when change happens, as it always will, you aren't just reacting to change, but you're leading change. Brandy leads practical consulting at the Olson Group, and she's the founder of Real Work Done, a learning and development company for leaders and their teams. Now, that is incredible, Brandy. Thank you again for your time to speak with us today. And tell us what brought you into the Agile space to begin with.
Thanks. Yes. So I have an unconventional background, I often say. I first learned about Agile with a capital A as a thing, actually back many years ago when I was teaching. So my background is in learning sciences, and I was a high school teacher. And I read an article about agile software development, and I immediately recognized that, like, oh, they're talking about code and testing, but really they're talking about solving complex problems when change is happening all the time and learning as you go, and this thing called retrospectives. And I immediately recognized, like, oh, those are the kinds of problems I'm trying to solve in my classroom and in my school. And I just dove right in. I recognized, kind of, I think a lot of people have this moment where sometimes you realize, like, oh, maybe I've always been agile and I've always operated in this way. Now I have this language for it. And turns out this whole wide global community of people who are trying to figure out, how do we work better together? And so I just dove right in my classroom and in my school, applying principles in different ways than I had been before, and exploring agility in education. And so that's where my early start was. And then from that, I stopped teaching, and I started doing instructional design work and developing learning programs and training programs in an agile way and using agility for the work that I was doing. And that led to just going deeper and deeper within the organizations that I was working with. My start in my professional career as a consultant was really on the business agility side of things, asking questions like, okay, well, we're designing this big learning program. How do you know it's going to work? How does this fit in with what you're trying to do? What's your actual strategic goal here? And getting invited to stick around longer and help us figure this out. And along the way, having just some really incredible mentors and learning opportunities to learn and understand the technology and the digital space of digital products. And And that over the years, that's how my career evolved. And so now I work with a lot of organizations who are somewhere along their digital transformation journey and trying to figure out how do we respond better? How do we really increase our performance of our teams in this rapidly changing world that we live in? And yeah, and so that's how I got my start. And it's not. I used to think it was a maybe a non-linear path to the work that I do, going from being an educator in a high school to working with CEOs and executives and leaders and organizations. And what I understand now, that I understood then, but I hold really deeply now, is that all transformation is about learning. And any organization in the world that we live in now, like the only real competitive advantage that you can have is how fast you can learn. And so that's what I bring into my work, is how do we learn better together? And so it makes a lot of sense. And that, like, grounding in how do we learn fast is really what I bring into my work.
Yeah. No, I think that is incredible. And starting agility in education is just so profound. And I know there are several change agents that are working in the education sector because that's truly shifting left.
Mm-hmm.
Really bringing them to the agile mindset, agile ways of working. And in fact, one of the pillars of Lean and Agile is LIA Next Gen. So we have, high school girls and young women in colleges kind of, getting this agile mindset sooner than later. So when they hit the organizations as workforce, they're equipped with that mindset,
Yes.
with that approach, and with those ways of working, than getting,
Yes.
completely caught new in that. So kudos to
Yes.
you for doing that because we need more, people like you kind of making the change there.
Well, and we absolutely need to be investing in and bringing along with us the next generation of leaders who are in kindergarten right now, and in middle
Yeah,
school, and in high school, and in college, to be I think explicitly teaching and cultivating that those skills that you learn about how to work in a group, and how to plan in a way that's really going to be effective, how to set a real goal, and pivot along the way to get there, to experiment, to figure out how it's going to work. Like those skills that young people often have, I think it's so important to be explicit. Like those are the skills that are most valuable.
yeah,
And to cultivate those skills. So much of the work that I often do when I'm working with teams is teaching those social and emotional skills that
yeah.
maybe we learned when we were in kindergarten, or somewhere along the way, but weren't really valued enough to cultivate.
Right.
And now we're in these, settings in which we've got to deeply collaborate with people
Yeah.
in a meaningful way. And we all need to grow in our social and emotional skills and our ability to do that. And so I think, like, teaching early on that, very explicitly, that those skills are highly valued and are necessary to be successful and to be effective and to add value to an organization is so important.
Totally agree. Totally agree. And in fact, that, just triggered a thought in my mind when you were talking about how you can really develop those leadership skills and identify leaders early on, right?
Mhm.
So they can really, in turn, contribute back to that community, the younger generation community, so they can kind of, collaborate and become a
Yes.
stronger workforce. Now, in fact, when so one step back, you have done that, you have made that impact in the educational sector, and you probably are still mentoring, the younger generation. And you're also a leadership coach. So in the organizations, you coach the leaders, you mentor the leaders, and you make the agile transformation happen in our organizations. How does that compare? Because that would be very interesting, right? Now you're teaching the young generation.
Mhm.
The way they perceive and learn is so much different than an adult, right?
Mhm.
Being a leader and sometimes with, their own egos, attached, and their own
Mhm.
resistance to kind of be part of the transformation,
Mhm.
right? How do you compare and contrast both? And is there lessons from the education background that you bring in here a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. It's certainly one I've reflected on a lot over the years. On the one hand, it is very different. The context in which we're learning is very different. On the other hand, the way humans learn is actually very, like, we're all human and we all learn in similar ways. And so when I'm working with an organization and a group of leaders, the thing that I'm grounding always in is we learn by doing. We
Right.
always learn by doing. And if we're going to make significant changes, so I think about transformation, we can like identify like the future state that we want this organization to be in. And we back up from that and we can think about like, okay, well, what kind of behaviors need to change and what kind of mindsets need to shift? And if we back up from that and say, well, then what needs to happen? Okay, we want these behaviors to change. Nobody changes behavior unless they've learned something compelling first. And so that learning process, all changes is learning. And so I think when I'm working with an organization, it's always about figuring out what problems are you trying to solve now? Let's use that as our context for whatever learning we need to do, developing new skills, trying out new ways of collaborating or planning or doing strategy or evaluating success. We start wherever we're at right now. And as we do that, as you learn and do and learn and do, the future becomes possible, right? It's here right now. And so my work is really grounded in very practical work. And I think that's something that I bring from my teaching background, which is like I can learn all the theory I want. But as an educator, when I was a teacher, if it wasn't easy to do, if it wasn't practical, if it didn't help me solve the problems I was trying to solve right now, I didn't really have the space to do something brand new and different. And I think that's true for most organizations and leaders and teams as well. There's an abundance of important work to do.
Yeah.
And so if the work that we're doing isn't very practical, if it doesn't work in reality, which is very messy and it's never perfect and things aren't always lined up exactly how we want them to be, if we can't find ways to get started in reality, then we'll never get started. So another thing that I think about often when I'm working with a group of leaders, perhaps a group of leaders who are under a lot of pressure, they're not sure that they want to make these changes, they maybe are skeptical of change. I always think about the most important thing. Sorry, the most important thing is to get moving. And so I could like look at a group and say, here's the best thing you should do next. But if that group of leaders isn't actually engaged and motivated and willing to try that, I can talk till I'm blue in the face and they're never going to do that. But maybe there's something else that's a smaller step or a slightly different step that that they are really motivated to do. So I worked with a group of leaders a couple of years ago, and we were, working in the context of a big digital transformation and reorganizing teams into cross-functional teams. And the priority that the organization had set was really around wanting to change how planning was happening and shifting to more of a product-oriented planning mode. And that was certainly the big goal. But I had a group of leaders that one in particular really was resistant to that and really didn't want to think about products. Like his head was just really stuck in kind of the way that he'd always thought about projects. But what he was really interested in was this idea of cross-functional teams. And so it wasn't like the top priority for the bigger organization to be like investing so deeply in the teams right now. They were like, we got to figure out what our products should be. And they really wanted their leaders to engage there. But this leader was really interested in those experimenting with cross-functional teams. And I really advocated for that might be the better next step for this small group to move forward, because he's got motivation and energy to work on that. And if he can see the value and the power of a cross-functional team and he's willing to invest in that change, that's better than him sitting on the sidelines and resisting and fighting against making these other changes around how the work flows. That can come next. It's important, but there was tons of resistance there, but he was really open to moving over here. So I think that's the other thing about learning is to go where there's motivation,
Right.
go where there's engagement. And it might not be the perfect path, but that perfect path doesn't actually exist.
Exists.
So
Yeah, I was going to say that.
find ways to take small steps that we're willing to take and we're engaged and invested in the outcome. I'd take that any day over the next right step or the best practice or the
Right.
perfect way to do it according to somebody else.
Yeah, smaller experiments, right? And how else
Yep.
will you know what works? And
Mm-hmm.
I'm totally with you on that fact that, there is no perfect path. There is no perfect, I would say, silver bullet for transformations or sustenance of transformations. Anyway, it is
Yep.
so different for each organization, for each leader, even within the same enterprise. Every organization within the enterprise is so
Mm-hmm.
unique. It's almost like a
Yep.
different company. If you see, they have their own culture, they have their own set of practices and resistance, approaches. So totally,
Exactly.
totally agree with that.
I often say there are no best practices, and I will stand by
Um,
that every day because a best practice implies that we're all the same. That what worked for your group and your culture and the people who are there is going to work exactly the same for us.
yeah.
That there's no best practices, there are better practices. And there are definitely bad practices. I'll
Yes.
definitely own that. But there's better practices and there's good patterns that we should be taking and using as other people have learned before us and developed better ways of being and better ways of working. We can take those patterns and use them, but there's no best practice that's going to work in every single organization or every single team.
Yeah.
And that like desire to do it the best way keeps us from learning better. There's a better way to do it. We can do better than we're doing today. That gets us in a learning mindset, a growth mindset. This
Yeah.
idea that there's just this best way to do it means we can be in analysis forever, or
Yeah.
we can try to shove something into a situation that
Sure.
isn't really going to be a good fit because people aren't able and ready to make that particular change in that
Yeah.
way.
And you could get into analysis paralysis, right? Most of the times because you're
Mm-hmm.
continuously scouting for that best practice, so-called best practice
Yep,
or best approaches, but you could never, reach there. I
exactly.
wanted to pivot to another very important aspect of career transitions. And in our conversations with women, they're always figuring out, the best career for themselves. But there is always an apprehension that we observe, because we interview so many women and we talk to so many women, on this Lean and Agile platform. There's always that apprehension that makes them hold back and makes them believe they're either an imposter, they're not good enough, they don't have all the skills, and also just the self-doubt that should I even cross that fence, right? God knows what is on the other side of the fence. I would rather be here in my comfort cushion, right? I think that
Mm-hmm.
applies to men and women. But with
Mm-hmm.
women, I think they have more strings attached with the family, or their desire to be perfect. When you made the transition from being an educator and mentor coach for education
Mm-hmm.
sector, and you made a switch to really going into organizations and really
Mm-hmm.
leveraging the skills, how did the career shift feel like, and did you have any internal dialogue kind of
Sure.
pulling you back? I think that would be
Of course.
valuable for our audience
Of
to know.
course. I think it that shift was one in some ways it was gradual. I started doing consulting work in a context that I was familiar with learning and design. Um, and in other ways it was really abrupt. How did a person who has been a has trained teachers and worked in large public school districts for years wind up doing leadership coaching with executives at Fortune 50 companies like that. The way that we often think about how careers work, like that's not the most linear path. For me, I think the shift I was able to make came from really knowing and being confident in my core expertise, which is I know how people learn and change. I'm very good at that. And what I need to be able to do is translate. I need to be able to talk about that in the context of product learning or strategic learning. Like, how do we learn as an organization in a way that allows our strategy to evolve? Um, and so it was knowing what my expertise is, and I certainly had and still have times where I'm like, what am I doing? How did I wind up here? And have that kind of
Interesting.
imposter syndrome.
Right.
Having people around me who see the value that I bring and be able to help me see that too when I'm wondering or when I'm doubting is invaluable. I think that was especially important, for me early in that career shift, is to not do it alone, to be connected, and to have mentors. I had some incredible mentors. I still have incredible mentors, that really invested and helped me learn what I needed to learn. And I think the other thing that comes to mind in that career shift is um, being really curious, asking a lot of questions, and um, and being okay with that, and being comfortable. It's that shift to say, I don't need to know everything, actually. In fact, that gets in my way. I don't need to be the expert in everything. I need to develop, and my value comes, many of the ways that I bring value is through the questions that I ask and the ways that I help people shift how they think about something.
Yeah.
And so being comfortable with not having all the answers. And that doesn't make me less skilled or less qualified. It actually makes me more qualified for the roles that I'm stepping into. So
Yeah. No,
that's
I
a
think
huge
that's,
mindset.
yeah, it's a huge mindset shift. And that's the right way to go about. And, I'm so thrilled that you mentioned that you probably don't have all the answers. It's okay to
Mm-hmm.
ask. But most importantly, one takeaway from that you mentioned is to really seek that help from mentors, right? There are so many of us who can, ask the right questions, but also have the answers, right? Not a single person has all the answers, which is why, as you said, you have so many mentors, great mentors,
Yes.
because you pick and choose, from the
Mm-hmm.
nuggets that they give you and form your own playbook, really. So I
Yes.
think the key is to reach out. And
Mm-hmm.
I think we are fortunate to have a beautiful Agile community around us.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone is so open to helping and supporting.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yes.
that's a
I
great
think
thing.
that's one of the most remarkable things about this, you know, I want to say decades long, but it's way longer than that. This journey towards how do we collectively work better together
Yeah.
is the openness that comes from that, and the global community of people who are asking similar questions, and the willingness and the desire to help each other
Yeah.
learn. And I think that, I look at the agile with a capital A, the, agile software development, and that work has really evolved our thinking and launched a lot of industries forward. But I look at the core of that and very much believe that what makes agility isn't something that a bunch of software developers came up with in the early
Right.
90s. The tenets of how we work well together are the principles of social change, principles of feminist action, and social justice that have been part of how we transform since humans have been solving big problems.
Yeah.
And in that creates this really, I think, special and unique space that's welcoming, that is embracing of other people's learning and journeys, and that willingness to mentor, to share, to teach. It's not competitive, it's collaborative.
Yes.
And you don't
Absolutely.
find that in every industry, and you
That
don't
is,
find that in
that is
every
so true.
sector.
Yes. Yes. No, that is incredible. Thank you so much for sharing, your journey and how you kind of shifted the careers and what it takes to do that. Um, as we wrap up, Brandy, do you have a message for our audience that you can
Mm.
share, which could be just a word, a phrase, something that you strongly believe and drives you?
Hmm. Yes. When you asked me that, I immediately knew. My first thought was, oh, a message. And then my next thought was, of course, I know what it is. And it's something that I've known to be true for a while. And I just keep leaning into over and over again, especially in this last year. And that is this mantra: a little bit of a good thing is still a good thing. And it's to me what that means is I can, like, again, similar to, like, I can see what the best thing I could imagine is way out there, and the path to get there may be really unclear or feel really impossible, or just insurmountable.
Right.
But a step towards that is still a good thing. A little bit of a good thing, a little bit move in the right direction. Um, it's still a good thing. It helps us move forward. And so that's something that I've been um, I practice in my consulting work, right? We teach those small steps, small experiments, but then personally as well. When I think about my own career path and the things that I'm pursuing, um, a little bit of a step in the right direction moves us forward. And from that next point, however small it might be, our vantage point changes.
Right.
And what we see shifts, where we want to go next shifts. And so that small, even those small steps, take us forward in the right direction. And so I think that's been the mantra that I have really leaned into a lot this year. And I offer that to you and to everyone else, to look for those ways in which trying to get the best thing is keeping us from moving forward. And we need to find those small little nuggets of good next steps,
Wow.
better next steps.
Yeah.
And I think that's how we move forward and out.
Yeah. 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 No, that's just so fantastic because that is so agile, right? We
Mm-hmm.
can be the best tomorrow, but we can be better tomorrow, right? The
Mm-hmm.
incremental steps toward
Yep.
that best thing that you're achieving
Mm-hmm.
tomorrow potentially. Now, this is great. Thank you so much, Brandy, for your time and for your wisdom that is shared on this platform. We really appreciate it. We wish you good luck with everything that you're doing and everything that you're about to do in future. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me into the conversation. I think it's these kinds of conversations where we collectively grow together. And so I love the project, and it's just an honor to be part of it.
Thank you so much. It's an honor.